Hello there once again, welcome to ENG 250, Week 2, Part 1. I say Part 1 because in order to facilitate uploading these lectures to YouTube, I've found it necessary to divide them into 15-minute blocks. The first, or Part 1 today, is going to deal with some theoretical issues. Part 2 is going to deal with Anton Chekhov's Lady with a Little Dog. Part 3 is going to deal with Guy de Maupassant's Vendetta. Okay. And if you go to Moodle, you'll find PowerPoint presentations that can guide you through each one of these sections of the lecture. Now, let me start with the theoretical issues. Richard Carney, I'm referring to Richard Carney's essays, Where Do Stories Come From? One of the reasons I introduce a theoretical text in a course on the short story is to offer some definition to the object of our study. We all know what stories are. We all have an idea about literature. What is not so clear, however, is why we should study literature. Richard Carney's answer to this question is that literature is a fundamental part of the way societies and individuals create meaning in life. Literature is a symbolic frame, or one of the symbolic frames in which we live. It is part of our identity as social and historic beings. Now, I've divided his argument into 5 parts. Okay? Part one deals with the claim that narrative is considered as an organizational principle in human life. It humanizes time by placing the events of a life and society in relationship to each other, usually in a chronological order. Narrative allows us to look back on where we came from and forward to where we are going. In this way, we forge an understanding of where we are now in the present. Narrative is a structure or order that allows us to understand ourselves in time. And just an illustration of this is we do this all the time in our own lives. Somebody asks us who we are. We tell a story. We say, I was born into this family, this society. These kinds of things happened to me as I was growing. This is where I am now. This is where I want to go in the future. This is who I think I am and who others seem to think I am. It's a very simple, kind of common sense idea, in fact. Part 2 of the argument. Thinking about storytelling as a form of narrative, Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, the ancient Greek philosopher, argued that literature is best understood as the imitation of human action. And we all know that human action is by definition interaction. When we act in relation to others. And so, Aristotle goes on to add that we may understand literature as constituting a world that we understand is shareable. So somehow literature has something to do with the fact that we understand in a society, that in any society we understand that our individual existence is intimately bound up with the existence of others. I don't mean others whom we know, I mean others we do not know. Okay? Yet we share a world with them. This is a powerful idea. When we read books from cultures that are several thousand years old, we are somehow sharing a world with them. Anton Chekhov, was writing in the late 19th century in Russia. That's about 130, 150 years ago. And yet many of his works seem to readers as to be fresh and contemporary. Reading Chekhov, we somehow share in his world, and his world in turn impinges upon our world. Let's just pause for a moment and consider some of the details. This is still talking about Chekhov and this idea of a shared world across time. 2 aspects of Chekhov's work are the topics of social justice and self-realization. When we read Chekhov, we recognise certain attitudes and patterns that relate to these topics. Let us say that we recognise our own context of social justice and self-realisation as being different from the ones laid down in a story written 130, 150 years ago. Of course, that's clear. It's only right that we should do so. Nobody demands that we should identify absolutely with what we find in a short story or in a piece of literature. Yet, the important thing is that we understand that difference. Moreover, it happens that we may use the situations and characters of the story to adopt a perspective on our own world. Number 3, part 3 of the argument, the symbolic. Literature often produces and generates its own realities, realities that seem to have nothing to do with the world we live in. It creates a symbolic world, which may in fact be very different from the world as we see it. Just let me give you an example of the way in which literature creates a symbolic world that seems somehow divorced from empirical reality. The example that Richard Carney gives in order to illustrate this point comes from the work of a French anthropologist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, professor at the University of Paris during the 1950s. He did a lot of work in South America with indigenous people. Often the kind of tribes that he was working with were societies that didn't have anything to do with what we call modern society. They were societies that were directly related to the earlier civilizations of South America. So the civilizations that pre-existed the Spanish conquest in the 16th century. Now, in one of these societies, Lévi-Strauss reports, when a woman is having trouble giving birth, they don't bring in doctors, knives and drugs, as they do these days. Rather, they bring in the magician priest, a guy who makes a lot of smoke, bangs his drums, and sings strange songs and dances around the place. Now, the song, this is the song that Lévi-Strauss reports, is of an army trapped in the mountains. This army is about to be massacred by the enemy, but at the last minute, miraculously, a gap opens up in the mountains, letting the trapped army push through to safety, and so the baby is born. Superstition, of course. But we need to keep in mind that many societies have put together such systems, and in fact continue to do so. Richard Carney says of such systems that they're designed not so much to reflect empirical reality, they're designed rather as symbolic systems, as systems of meaning that allow the resolution of problems, conflicts, contradictions that otherwise can't be resolved. In a way, contradictions and problems that can't be resolved in the real world, empirically. Therefore, these problems get reframed in a symbolic framework, thus allowing for a new kind of resolution, a symbolic resolution. Now, Carney's argument is that this is one of the functions of literature. Literature doesn't intervene in reality and tell us we should do this or we should do that. Rather, it creates, out of reality, a symbolic world, a symbolic framework, and offers, if you like, symbolic solutions to problems that are otherwise empirical. Now, if you are skeptical about this, look at politics. And very often in contemporary politics, where you have serious economic problems, for example, large numbers of people, including large numbers of politicians, demand solutions, but very often these solutions are not real solutions. They're symbolic solutions. They make people feel good. Think of the United States, where there is a presidential election at the moment. There is a candidate who's saying, the way we're going to solve America's problems, its political problems, its economic problems, is that we're going to put a lot of pressure on minorities, Mexicans, for example. Let's build a wall, keep the Mexicans out. Let's keep the Muslims out as well. This is what some politicians are saying. These are not solutions. They're not solutions at all. They're just symbolic gestures. And the point being is that while we might dislike immensely these kinds of opinions, they tend to be typical of politics in times of difficulty. And there are other examples too, where we see the prevalence of the symbolic solution over the empirical solution. Mental health, for example. Scientifically trained psychiatrists working in very old cultures in the world will sometimes attest that where their drugs and their therapies fail, the older cures and therapies of the culture, administered by guys dancing around, shaking a stick, performing certain ancient rituals, do tend to work, or may tend to work. Let's think of Anton Chekhov. We read Lady with a Little Dog. There's no empirical solution offered to the problem that Anna and Dmitri have. Their problem is a permanent problem. Nothing is solved. Yet, at the symbolic level, there is some attempt at resolving it. So the novel doesn't offer us a symbolic solution. It offers us, in fact, simply a symbolic representation of the problem, which is a kind of solution in itself. Now, part 4 of the argument refers to mimesis. It's a Greek word, it means imitation. That is, literature imitates reality. Many have interpreted this as meaning that first there is lived reality, then literature comes along and takes a snapshot of it and holds a mirror up to it. It's a common sense point of view. Richard Carney says no, he rejects this idea. Firstly, for him, literature is part of our reality and not secondary to it, as we've already seen. Secondly, if there is a mirror effect, if a mirror is held up to human actions, then it's not the human actions that are clear to us. It's designed to articulate, to express, to shine a light on the hidden patterns, quote unquote, of human action. That is, things about our lives that are not perhaps clear, aspects of our lives that are mysterious to us, unconscious to us. Part 5 of the argument, again another Greek word, catharsis. Catharsis means purging of the emotions, the cleansing of the emotion. And it's a very, very old literary concept. It's also a very old psychological concept. If literature focuses on the hidden patterns, if it focuses on what's not clear to us, what's unconscious, then that which it presents to us is going to be somehow unfamiliar, yet at the same time familiar. It's going to be rather strange to us. Okay? Strange and contradictory. The argument is that in our encounter with these strange and contradictory elements of our world, we are moved emotionally. We're moved because we see things with which we're familiar, and they are ours, and we see things with which we are unfamiliar, and they're not ours. Aristotle used the terms pity and fear when we, and we'll take this up in the next class.